Hi, I am Tony Russo from Deathcare, and this is The Rest, your weekly rundown of news from around funeral service. We have plenty of stories to discuss this week, and I'm going to do a couple of deep dives, fewer stories, and they're going to be a little bit longer to report, but I think that's the best way to approach this week. I do have a rant on AI that I will close with because we're going to be talking about AI a lot this week, and I also want to kind of plug an upcoming story that is more in depth than I've really ever gotten to speak with funeral professional about their business. So all of that's coming up. Before we get into it, I want to, as always, thank my paid subscribers. I just got a new one this afternoon, and I can't tell you how happy it makes me when someone plunks their quarter on the line, as it were. And so thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to support me, you can subscribe. Subscribing for free is the kind of support that I need. Subscribing for pay is absolutely wonderful, and I'm always grateful for it. But both of those things, actually all of those things, there's a range of financial support that you can choose from if you go to ondeathcare.com and click the subscribe button. It'll give you a bunch of different options. And if you are not ready to, or even if you're not interested in subscribing me financially, don't let Substack bully you. You make your own decisions. But I do really, really appreciate the support. It helps me make ends meet as I continue to try to build this kooky project of mine out. So thanks again. All right, let's get into it. First up this week, there's been kind of a shift in the, I don't know if you call it the pecking order. I don't know if you call it the company sizes of consolidators this week that I want to talk about. And it was something that I noticed. It wasn't an announcement. And I think that is equally as important. So let's just start at the beginning. I was going through old press releases and I read the one from Foundation Partners about their most recent CEO. And it read like this. I'm going to read it to you. Foundation Partners Group, one of the nation's leading providers of funeral, cemetery, and cremation services, today announced the appointment of Jim Evinger as Chief Executive Officer. And I read it, and it just felt wrong. And then I realized what was different because they have, Foundation Partners has always had this kind of like stock opening. And it goes like this. Foundation Partners Group, the nation's second largest provider of funeral services, today announced the nationwide launch of Monarch Trade Services, and that goes on. That was from February of 2026. The first one was from June of 2026, and I was wondering what happened between February and June to make them stop making this claim. And first of all, the claim always kind of not set me on edge a little bit, but it was always weird because Everstory is the second largest consolidator, but Everstory specializes in cemeteries. So by saying, one of the nation's second largest provider of funeral services, that's like with a funeral home ownership is kind of what makes them the second. And it occurred to me that there was another company that had been buying up a ton of properties between February and June, and that was Park Lawn. And no one's answering my questions from either Park Lawn or from Foundation Partners, and I don't blame them. But the Park Lawn, I think, has overtaken Foundation Partners as the second largest provider of funeral services. Everstory remains the second largest corporate consolidator. But, it's funny that Foundation Partners decided to just stop mentioning it and that Park Lawn decided to not mention it at all. And I could be wrong. Like I said, I did reach out to Park Lawn. Like I said, I didn't get an answer from Park Lawn. So I did reach out to Homesteaders because the CEO and chairman of the board of Homesteaders and the CEO and the chairman of the board of Park Lawn are the same person, and that is Steve Schaefer. And I thought maybe they would, be able to shed some light on that. And of course, Schaefer was supposed to be temporarily in charge of Park Lawn, so I wondered, how things were going with the search for the new CEO for Park Lawn, especially since they've been putting out these press releases and kind of leaning on the fact that they have a president and not mentioning the CEO position at all. But Homesteaders said that they don't know what's going on over at Park Lawn, or at least that they are not going to comment for Park Lawn on Park Lawn operations. So there is no timeline that anyone has provided yet about whether and if Steve Schaefer will stop being the part-time CEO of Park Lawn. That was one of the things that Homesteaders was clear about, that he is not a day-to-day CEO over at Park Lawn. So Park Lawn doesn't have a day-to-day CEO, and they're the second largest, possibly the second largest, funeral home consolidator. And I think of the movie Moneyball. I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a scene in the movie Moneyball where they're trying to convince a catcher to become the first baseman, and one of the executive, of course, he says, "It's not that hard," and the guy on the ground says, "Oh, it is incredibly hard." And I'm wondering if that's kind of the new approach to being a CEO of a consolidator. It's not that hard. You just have to check the numbers, make sure you made more revenue this month than you made last month, and you've done a great job as the consolidator CEO. Maybe there's more to that, maybe there's not. I have another consolidator story coming up that I want to use to kind of talk about the difference. So that is next. There's not a link to this in the show notes because there's nothing publicly available. This is not just my speculation, but this is my speculation based on things that are about other things. There's also been a little bit of a shakeup at Milestone Funeral Partners, but this one was a lot easier to understand and hopefully will be a lot easier to explain. David Mahoney has been named as its new director of integrations, where he will lead a newly established onboarding division. Now, this was the part that wasn't as clear to me as I wish it had been in the press release, but that's really okay because now I get to tell you in case it was unclear to you. A couple weeks ago, we had reported on some of the consolidation that Milestone had been doing, and in answer to some of the criticism, the co-founder and CEO Mike Martell said, "We are a funeral director forward company. Our funeral directors are the ones that are running things," and he was very clear about that, and he was very clear about funeral directors bringing on other funeral directors. So when they announced this addition of David Mahoney, who has no funeral home experience, I shot him an email and I'm like, what's going on? And the short version is that the gentleman who had been running it, Vincent Iacovazzi, wasn't dismissed or anything. He was just given a half of his job because the other half of his job is about to get very big. So Milestone, as we mentioned before, they're trying to do more growth and they're trying to do smarter growth. And Iacovazzi runs the market section. So he's kind of like a district manager. I get that kind of impression, and also in charge of integration. And it was, given the number of funeral homes that they hope to bring on, it was too much to put on one person. And so what they did was they kind of reorganized the way that they're doing this. So Mahoney was brought on to just do the administrative part. So he's essentially, he's an AR professional and he's a finance guy. And he's there to do the HR and the finance for the funeral directors who are doing the integrating, which I think is an important distinction and one worth noting. And I want to quote directly from Mr. Martell's response to me a little bit. In order to do that, we needed to build a team led by a professional director-level project manager to have a dedicated integration specialists who are funeral professionals, administrative specialists who come from funeral service, as well as an HR professional and a finance professional to kind of oversee the whole thing. So, hats off to him for being forthright and also for kind of staying true to his plan. I mean, I have a really good podcast coming up next week that I'll talk about in a second, where I speak with the chief operating officer of another consolidator who is also very forthright about what they do and how they do it. And I wonder if this is the new way to go. Instead of saying, here is a basket full of cash, now go away. I wonder if this kind of hyper participatory, really working to stay connected to the local culture and the culture that was developed by the funeral home owner is going to increasingly be a sales point as funeral home owners rather, who don't have a workable succession plan before they need one, start to look at consolidation and corporate ownership as a viable alternative. Because as we've been mentioning, I'm not telling you anything. It's getting busy out there. So link to that story, though, in the show notes. So in New Orleans this week, a funeral home was closed down by the state in an eviction action. And it wasn't just a funeral home. It was New Orleans Funeral and Cremation Service. So there were 16 bodies and 12 sets of 12 cremated remains that were essentially repossessed by the state and put into the New Orleans coroner's office, where I imagine, this is kind of a breaking story, that the families are being contacted and told that they have to make other decisions. Whether they've paid first or not is a huge question. The owner's name is Gary Lewis, and this isn't a name and shame kind of thing. He bought it at a credit sale in November 2021 on the strength of the fact that he was from a funeral home family in South Carolina. I've not confirmed which funeral home that is. There is a Lewis Funeral Home in South Carolina, but I haven't been able to get any kind of traction there. But it was enough to get him the credit to buy this, and it lasted 2 whole years. And in 2023, he also filed Chapter 11. No, he filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy to reorganize and be protected from his creditors. But as far as I can tell, when you make a Chapter 11 agreement, if you consistently fail to live up to that agreement, they just come and take your stuff. But in this case, his stuff included cremated remains and decedents who had to be moved out. I don't know if he thought no one would actually do this. I would have thought no one would do it. One would expect that there must be another solution besides repossessing human bodies. But that is apparently what's going on in New Orleans. So again, there's a link to everything that I found on this in the show notes, and I will update this story as more details become available. I feel a little self-indulgent plugging my next podcast on my current podcast, but Thursday's show is going to be really good, and I want to bring it to your attention and maybe convince you to subscribe if you're not a subscriber to the On Deathcare podcast feed. I spoke with Lindsay Granson, and she is the Chief Operations Officer at Heritage Family. And we spoke about a rebranding that they did and some of the difficulties surrounding that. And that story is great on its own, and no spoilers. You'll have to listen to the show for that. But at the end of the show, we started to talk about branded funeral directors. And one of the things that, if you're a regular listener or a regular reader, you'll know that I encourage, and I'm certainly not the only one, encouraging the owners and the funeral directors at independent businesses to make sure that they are a big part of the branding. Be the face of your business. We say this a lot. I'm, again, not the only one. But when you sell the business, you're still the face of it. What happens to the social media aspect of it? So your social media presence is kind of a weird, like, funeral homeowners often will sign a non-compete agreement. I won't open another funeral business on this, in this town for 5 years or whatever it is, or whatever the deal is. There's always some sort of non-compete deal with the former owner when they sell to a corporation. But what's going to be interesting in the coming years is whether or not they're asked to sell their social media presence. What do you do if you have a significant social media presence and a significant social media following? That belongs to you. Let's just pretend there's a funeral director who has a huge following on Substack. I live in Del Mar, Maryland. I put out Death in Del Mar. I'm a funeral director. I put out Death in Del Mar Weekly, where I write what I'm thinking about the death care industry or about death and dying for my neighbors. And then I sell my funeral home. I still own the Tony Russo-ness of me. And that can be an issue, especially if, in the case we talk about in the podcast, the former owner kind of went off the reservation a little bit, and it got temporarily ugly. And the folks at Heritage handled it with aplomb, but it's something to consider as you're building your social media presence. That has an additional value. And of course, if you are a corporate consolidator, what do you do when you buy a business from someone who is a social media influencer or even just a social media influencer type? The other thing we say is you don't need to have 20 million followers on Instagram to have an effective social media presence. You just need 600 or 700 people in your hometown. 1,000 people in your hometown is more than sufficient. So if you have any thoughts about this, I would love to hear them. This is a conversation that I think is going to continue for quite some time. You can reach out to me in the show notes. You can reach out to me in the comments. You can shoot me an email. You can respond to the email that you got with this podcast in it, or you can email me. My email address is ByTonyRusso@gmail.com. That is ByTonyRusso@gmail.com. Just a quick update on one of the more popular stories on the On Deathcare website. I had written a product story, which I usually don't like to write, or I don't write anyway, about Guidant, which is a company that invented a buy now button for cemeteries. And I said it in the story, and I think I may have mentioned it even in the podcast before. It was a really kind of weird Ron Popeil type moment for me, because I heard their pitch, and they're like, we're going to do this, and we make this essentially, they don't use the word buy now button for cemeteries. That's definitely my coinage. But they explained everything they did, and I said, okay, well, what makes yours different from the other, buy now buttons for cemetery plots? And they're like, well, there aren't any. And then I was like, you mean there's no such thing as a buy? But I felt like I'd been kind of tricked into becoming a pitch man. But I also try to be a little self-aware about it. So I thought it was very cool that it was a novel addition to the cemetery tech movement. And this week they announced that they've integrated with CEMSites. So if you have a CEMSites cloud management software in your cemetery, now you also have access to Guidant, which is, I feel like people are finding it useful. Like I said, people are still coming and finding the story and still reading it. So I feel like there's interest. And this is why I'm sharing this with you. So if you are a CEMSites cemetery, now you have access to Guidant. I'm sure you know that by now, but if you don't, now you do. You can see my story on it in the show notes, and there's a link to the official press release in the story that I wrote. Finally, and this is something that also is going to take some time to unpack, I'm inviting you to please comment upon it. Send me an email. I've gotten a bunch already on my LinkedIn page, but I like to have these conversations on Substack where we're all just funeral industry people talking about funeral industry things. I posted up an AI slop video that was just offensively bad, and the first response was from my friends at Titan, who had done an AI video in 2025. And they shared it with me kind of like, well, at least it's not as, what do you think about this one? And now everyone who makes AI videos has sent me an AI video showing me that there are ways to do good AI videos. I don't know if there are. What I do know is that bad AI makes good AI irrelevant. It's important to remember, I think, that there are customers. There aren't just marketers telling you that you can save time and money with AI. There are customers who are being forced to deal with it. And consider your customer experience. I just got off the phone with my insurance company. Boy, that was hellish. Call your insurance carrier. Call your health insurance provider. Call your property insurance provider. And if they have an AI answering service that is even worse than the, press 9 to do this, press 6 to do this, think about your experience with that. Think about how unimportant you feel. This is a company that's happy to take your money. My insurance company didn't send me a discount saying, hey, we're not paying people to answer the phones anymore. Instead, we're going to give you an AI, and that AI may or may not lose or share your information, but we will be training our AI on your responses. And when our AI is doing badly, we'll learn how to make it better using your time and energy. And when it's you, see how you feel about it, and then see if that's how you want your customers to feel, your potential customers. I have said before, and will say again, I think AI answering is perfectly acceptable, especially for direct cremation brands. If people are calling you because you're a direct cremator, I don't think that I think that people understand that. They're like, yes, part of my saving money is I don't get to talk to a person. It makes perfect sense. And then there's always the opportunity to follow up with the family and say, all right, well, thank you for choosing us, and here are some of the options. But you wouldn't have an AI person call the family back to ask them if there's anything else that you can do for them, because they would be offended by it. If the customer is not worth earning, then they know that. It's dripping from it. So when I click on an AI video and it's garbage, and people say, well, no, here's the good version. Well, I didn't click on the good version. And people are getting tired of AI. I don't know if you're tired of AI. If you're not tired of AI in your own personal life, that's fine. But if you are tired of AI in your own personal life, why would you inflict it on your customers? I think that's the beginning and the end of the AI conversation. But again, I am a zealot. Please tell me why I am wrong. Don't send me AI videos to prove that I'm wrong, please. Everything looks like a clip from Polar Express to me. I am a media professional. I'm used to Polar Express type stuff. Like, oh no, but this is the good Polar Express, where you can barely tell that it's not really Tom Hanks. Anyway, there's no link to that in the show notes. You can go see the discussion on my LinkedIn page if that's something that interests you. And that will do it for this time. The rest has been an On Deathcare production. It was written, edited, videoed, transmogrified, all the things by me, Tony Russo. Been a pleasure, having a blast, as always. I really am. I genuinely enjoy doing this. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do, or at least enough to keep coming back. As I say every week, and I mean every week, and I will say again, there is so much demand for your time, and the fact that you spend any of your time with me is just gratifying. So thank you so much. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the notes of encouragement, and, taking me down a peg when I need it, because I don't mind less than thrilling reviews, especially when they're right. So thank you guys who are shooting me emails, keeping me honest. I appreciate it very much. If you would like to become a paid subscriber, you can do that at ondeathcare.com. If you would like to become a free subscriber, you can do it at the same place. Please go to ondeathcare.com, where you can subscribe for anything from $0 to more than $0 per month. I appreciate the support and everything you guys do to keep me going, and I want to keep fighting the good fight. Oh, just real quick, also, I was on Tanya Marsh's podcast, Death at Sec, and if you're not listening to that, you are missing out. It is one of the best death care podcasts, especially because it's lawyers talking about death care law, which is something you don't normally get in other places. You don't get anywhere. I think this is the only death care law podcast on the planet, the one that she does. And then sometimes I trick her into coming into my podcast and telling you guys some law stuff so that I don't have to break my brain on it. But that'll do me again for this time. I really appreciate it. And I'll check in with you next time.